Well, good morning, everybody. Appreciate you joining us, especially today as we are kicking off this brand new series of messages called Impact. And so over the next 6 weeks, we're going to explore Jesus' call for us to make a kingdom impact with our lives, that both individually as followers of Christ and collectively as a church family, we are called to make a positive difference in the lives of people outside the walls of our church building. And of course, if you've been around Cedar Creek for a while, you know it is our desire as a church to be outwardly focusing. Yes, we want to be inwardly connecting, and we're all about connecting in authentic community with each other inside the family, but we also want to leverage that connection to make a difference in the lives of people around us and literally people around the world. In fact, that's why we say one of our goals as a church is not to be the best church in our community, but we want to be the best church for our community. And the reason that is a goal for us as a church is because that is the very mission that Jesus has given us, right? And we find that mission in the very final words spoken by Jesus after his resurrection and just before his return to heaven, when he gathered his followers together and said, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all the things that I taught you. And remember, I'm going to be with you all the way to the end of the age." This great commission of Jesus is the heart of who we are and what we do as a church. Now, I know for some of us this morning, the idea of thinking about living out this mission to really impact others in a positive way feels like, that may be great for some of y'all, but Philip, I'm barely holding on by a thread myself. I can't think about helping or impacting others. I feel like it just takes everything I have just to get out of the bed. I was really hoping to come today and hear you preach a message about how to get through what you're going through, or a message about how to find peace in the chaos and pain of life. And if that's you this morning, listen, you are not left out, right? Jesus didn't call his followers together and say, once you get your life together, right, once you get everything fixed, then go and make disciples. He called all of us to go, whatever our circumstances. In fact, I think some of the most effective times when we live on mission to help others is when we just get up and take another step, another day, trusting in Jesus just to get through the pain of life. Often that is when our light shines the brightest. So there is something in this series over these next 6 weeks, whatever your circumstances, there is something for all of us who are followers of Jesus. Now, it's important that you understand when Jesus spoke these words to his first followers, they knew exactly what he was saying. When he left, they didn't stand there and scratch their heads down. Now, what did he say about disciple making and baptizing and teaching? No, they knew what he was talking about because they had watched him do it for the last 3 years. They knew what Jesus was saying is what you see me doing, what you see me teaching, how you see me reaching, just keep that mission moving forward. And that is what we are called to even today. And so over the next 6 weeks, since we didn't get to hang out with Jesus during his public ministry, but what we do have is an accurate recording of all that Jesus did and said that's relevant for us to know how to continue his mission. So over these next 6 weeks, we're going to look at some things Jesus said, some parables that he taught, some of the things that Jesus did, and all of that, I believe, will help us take a next step in living out his mission in our lives. So does it sound like a good journey? Sounds like something be helpful? This means yes. It helps me if I know you're really there. Sound like a good idea? All right. So best way, I think, to start this whole thing off, to talk about how to live on mission, is to start with the motivation behind our mission. Because motivation matters, right? Why you do something can be just as important as what you do. And we see clearly the motivation that Jesus had for his mission in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 9. So if you got a Bible app, turn or click Matthew chapter 9. We're going to look at the very end, the last couple of verses of Matthew chapter 9. Now this passage we're going to look at is known as a transitional passage. It sort of transitions from what has been going on before and leads us into what is about to happen. And so through the first 9 chapters of Matthew's gospel, he's told us about Jesus' lineage, right? Who all his ancestors were. He tells us about Jesus' birth and the wise men. He tells us about Jesus launching his public ministry at 30 years of age. He tells us all about Jesus calling his first disciples. He tells us a lot about the teachings of Jesus. Matthew really loved to record the things that Jesus taught. In fact, Matthew uses 3 chapters of his gospel to record word for word Jesus' most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. And that's Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. You'll see that's all red letters. Matthew has more red letters, the words of Jesus, than probably any of the other gospel writers. But then in chapters 8 and 9, Matthew starts telling us about Jesus' ministry and mission, of Jesus traveling to towns and villages, preaching, teaching, healing, comforting, helping, hurting people. And now moves into chapter 10, where Jesus is going to send out his disciples to do what he did in the villages around him. If you were with us last week, you know, we saw in Luke's gospel where Jesus sent out the 72 other followers, right? But here, Jesus is just sending out the 12, the apostles. And so it would appear that maybe earlier in his ministry, Jesus sent out just the 12 to minister in the village. And then later on, he sent out the extended circle of followers, the 72 paired up in teams, right? So this seems to take place. Now, the instructions are incredibly similar, but there are some differences. So this is what's getting ready to happen beginning in chapter 10. So Matthew ends chapter 9 by giving us a summary of Jesus' ministry, his mission, and most importantly, his motivation. So let's look at it. Beginning with verse 35, Matthew writes, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. And when Jesus saw the crowds, he had what? Everybody, he had compassion on them. Why? Because they were harassed and helpless. They were like sheep without a shepherd. Missional living requires compassionate motivation. Let me say that again. Missional living requires compassionate motivation. It's not just what you do, it's the why behind it. Right? We've all seen human services organizations and non-governmental organizations that exist to care for the needs of the poor and the marginalized. We've all seen these big organizations, and they give out checks, they give out food, they vouchers for housing. We've all seen them do that, but there's very little compassion in that. Right? There's so many policies and procedures and bureaucracy that, they may be meeting needs, but they're not necessarily motivated by compassion. Now, I'm not saying that the incredible people who work in social work and work on the front lines in those organizations, I'm not saying that they don't have compassion. I'm just saying they're often so overwhelmed and so handcuffed by policies and procedures and bureaucracy that compassion sort of drifts away. But then on the other side of that coin, we've all seen Christians and churches who are only focused on the eternal soul of people and ignore the practical needs of the people they're trying to win for Jesus. In fact, that's why James, the brother of Jesus, said, if you see someone in need and just say, God bless you, be warm and well fed, what have you done? Nothing. It doesn't really matter. And so, yes, we need to be on mission to meet needs, but we need to be moved by compassion because Jesus was. And so as we unpack this little transitional passage, I believe it's going to show us three things that Jesus teaches us about true missional compassion. Three things that we need to live on mission with compassion. So let's jump in. Number one, missional compassion starts with moving towards people. It starts with moving towards people. And when I say moving towards people, I mean that both in a physical, geographical sense, but I also mean it in an emotional sense, moving towards people emotionally, because we see both of those with Jesus. Right? Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but he grew up in Nazareth. And when he started his public ministry, he headquartered his ministry in a little village, a fishing village on the northern sea of Galilee called Capernaum. In fact, several of Jesus' very early followers were from Capernaum. They were fishermen in that village. But Jesus didn't set up his headquarters in Capernaum so that people in the region could come to him. He set up a base in Capernaum so that from that base, he and his disciples, his followers, could launch out to go where people were. In fact, we saw that right off the bat, the very beginning of verse 35. Look at what it says. Jesus went through all the towns and villages. That's why the very first word of the Great Commission is go. Go and make disciples. In fact, in the Greek, which is the language that Matthew wrote in, the verb tense of that word go literally means as you are going. There's this continual sense of mission. Not when I sign up to serve with a partner or I go on one of the international global outreach trips or when I'm doing something special. It's just a constant living on mission wherever you go. See, living on mission doesn't mean that you need to pack up your family and move and serve in a village somewhere in the bush in Africa, unless that's what you're called to. And we've been so blessed as a church to have people raised up in this church that God has called specifically to live out their unique mission of sharing the gospel and meeting needs in a cross-cultural context. But that doesn't mean that we all have to do that. But we are all called to live on mission. And let me tell you, living on mission is always going to require us getting out of our comfort zone. This whole going is such a big deal to God that when the very first Christians, those early Christians in and around Jerusalem, when they didn't go, when they stayed together in Jerusalem in spite of the fact that Jesus had told them to go and make disciples, God, depending on your theology, God either caused or allowed persecution to break out in Jerusalem. Why? So they would scatter. And scatter they did. And guess what? The gospel spread across the known world. Missional living is a going. But we're not only called to move towards people physically or geographically, Jesus also calls us to move towards people emotionally. Now, what does that mean? What do you think I mean when I say move emotionally towards people? Well, the one word I think of is the word empathy, right? To empathize means to move emotionally towards someone, to feel what someone else is feeling. We often conflate sympathy with empathy, but they are not interchangeable. Sympathy and empathy are two very different things. Sympathy is based on pity. Sympathy is feeling sorry or bad about what someone else is going through. Empathy is feeling what someone is going through. Empathy means your pain causes me pain. Sociologist and social worker Dr. Brene Brown, in her TED Talk, put it well. She says, empathy fuels connection with others. Sympathy fosters disconnection. Why? Because sympathy is based on pity. Oh, I feel sorry for you. Really what I'm saying is I'm a little superior to you. I'm sorry you're such a pitiful, can't get your life together, but look at me. I'm all that and a bag of chips. No, empathy is to feel what people feel. Jesus was the greatest empath of all time. I know President Bill Clinton coined the phrase, I feel your pain. Jesus actually felt the pain of the people around him. One of my favorite examples is with the sisters of his good friend Lazarus. You know, the guy he raised from the dead? You remember that part of the story where Jesus delays? When he gets there, Lazarus is already dead and been in the grave for a couple of days. And the sisters come out and they're grieving and they're a little angry at Jesus, like if you'd have just gotten here on time, you could have saved him. And how does Jesus respond to their tears? With his own tears. That's where that shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept, that's where it comes from. What is he weeping for? Not grief over the loss of his friend Lazarus. He knows he's going to raise him from the dead. He is grieving because of the pain and grief of these two sisters that he loved and cared about. That's empathy. Paul puts it this way, Romans 12:15. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. And that sounds good, but if we're honest and let's get real, we tend to be jealous when other people rejoice, right? Why did they have this good thing? Why did they get a new car? Why did they win the lottery? Why is their football team better than mine? We tend to be jealous, not rejoice. And while we may feel sad for people who mourn, deep down we're a little bit thankful that it's not us, right? That I've not had to go through that. I believe one of the biggest barriers to passionately caring for lost and hurting and broken people around us is that we have forgotten that without Jesus, we were lost and hurting and broken. See, our tendency, we see the pain and the problems of the people around us, and our immediate focus goes to cause and cure. Like, how do we fix this? Well, if you made better decisions, if you were better with your money, if you moved to this place, if you were less lazy, or, you just need to take these 3 happy hops to get your life together. We forget, church, not there but for the grace of God go I. We've forgotten that before the grace of God, that's where we were. That's who we were. Missional compassion starts with seeing myself in the faces of the people around me. Number 2, the second thing Jesus teaches us about missional compassion is that it means not looking away. True missional compassion means not looking away. As Christ followers in the information age, we are inundated and overwhelmed by the images of need and hurt and brokenness around us. You can't hardly turn on the TV without seeing what I call poverty porn. Pictures of starving children in Africa. And you scroll through Facebook and you read the horror stories of human trafficking in Asia. And you see the school shooting here and the devastated families. And you see the kidnapping here and the rape and the murder here. And you see all this. And we're just bombarded. And our souls have become anesthetized to the pain around us. We're numb. And it's just easier to scroll on by. It's just easier to look away. But I want you to see what Jesus did. Verse 36. It said, when Jesus saw the crowd, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Now, don't miss this. Don't miss this. This was Jesus after he had been in and among those crowds for weeks, maybe months. He had been up to his elbows in the pain and the suffering, day in and day out, crowds of people pressing in, healing, caring for, preaching the gospel to. But instead of compassion fatigue, Jesus sees that crowd, and he doesn't see just this overwhelming mob of unmet needs. He sees individuals with broken hearts and broken lives. That's what that word harassed means. Matthew said they were harassed and helpless. In the Greek, that word harassed means deeply troubled, broken down by the stuff of life, bone weary of the struggle. And yet Jesus is still moved by their plight. He still feels compassion for them. But listen, he feels compassion for them not because they've had a run of bad luck, not because they were born on the wrong side of the tracks, not because they had made bad decisions in their life, not because the other political party created it. He felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Do you understand what Jesus did? He saw past just the external problems and needs and pain. He saw the hopelessness within. He saw them as sheep without a shepherd. Is that what you see in the people around you? When you scroll on Facebook and you get so mad at somebody who's living a lifestyle and proudly living a lifestyle that contradicts God, do you see somebody, an opponent to be mad at? Or do you weep for a sheep who has no shepherd to give them the truth? When you stop at that intersection where that person with the sign is standing, do you look away? Don't make eye contact. Right? Or if you do look at them, what do you see? You see somebody down on their luck? Somebody who's had some struggles and pains? Or do you see somebody who's cheating the system? Do you see somebody who looks like they ought to be able to get out there and work? They're just being lazy? Or do you see a sheep without a shepherd? Because if we're going to live on mission with compassion, church, we got to see what Jesus sees. And then number 3, the third thing we have to do to have missional compassion is we have to respond with hope and help. Missional compassion responds with hope and help. There is no true compassion without action. You cannot be living on mission without doing something, without getting your hands dirty in the pain and struggles of people around you. And unfortunately, we now live in a culture where doing something just means pointing it out on social media. It just means, liking or sharing or pointing out, who the oppressed are and who needs our help. And all of a sudden, I've done something. I gave a little to a GoFundMe. I shared that post. I liked that post. I copied it and pasted that post. That is not responding with compassion. That's just moral posturing. That's just trying to feel morally superior to others, to feel better about myself. Well, I did something. I'm really a good person because I pointed out bad stuff. We have not been called to be good people. We have been called to be transformed people by the gospel and share the hope of the gospel in any way and every way possible. Let's stop pointing it out and just get our hands dirty, providing hope and help to the people around us. Do you see what Jesus' need is to this huge crowd of sheep without a shepherd? What does He do? He calls us. He calls us followers. He calls us to pray. Pray to the Lord of harvest to send more. And then He sends us into the fight to do what He did. To preach the gospel, to teach, to love, to care for, to heal, to walk with, right? Look again at verse 35. This is what Jesus did. Teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. Two things Jesus did. One, bring a message of hope. Two, provide practical help for the needs of people where you can. Because if we just provide help without hope, we're just putting a Band-Aid on a cancer. Right? It may make them feel better for a little while. Right? It may make them look better on the outside, but we've not dealt with the true need of every human being. The greatest need of the human race is spiritual hope, a transformed life, the life that Jesus offers all of us. But on the other hand, if we just preach a message of hope, but we don't provide practical help for the needs of others, we have become what Paul described as just a sounding gong and a clanging cymbal. We just become another blah, 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 blah in a culture with way too much blah, 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 blah. We have been called to live out the gospel, getting our hands dirty in the pain and the struggle, and introducing sheep without a shepherd to the one and only true shepherd. Jesus put it this way in His Sermon on the Mount. And I want to close our service with these words of Jesus. Jesus said, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify you? No. They may see your good deeds and go, wow, isn't Cedar Creek Church a great church for our community? No. So that they may see our good works and put their eyes on Jesus and find the hope and help that only He can offer. So Cedar Creek, what would that look like in your life? Like right now, in your journey, in your struggle. Maybe if you're just barely hanging on, maybe living on mission would look like just getting up tomorrow, getting dressed, and just getting through a day and giving Jesus credit for getting you through the day. That may be the greatest light you'll ever shine. For some of you, it may be looking at the gifts and skills and resources God has blessed you with and figure out how to be intentional about living on mission. It might be time to finally stop fighting with your coworkers and neighbors over behaviors and morality and just start letting the light of Jesus and His hope shine through your life. I don't know what it is for you, but I know if you follow Jesus, His words are clear. Go, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all that I have taught you. And here's the great news, this promise: I am with you. Would you pray with me? Oh, Father, I thank you so much for just the clarity of your word, where it's a clear call to live on mission, but not mission for the sake of mission, but to be motivated by compassion, to be so overwhelmed by your love and your grace and your mercy to us that we see in the faces of everyone around us just where we used to be. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, Lord, don't ever let me forget that I am but a broken and hurting wretch who's found hope and transformation and purpose in you, not because of me, but because of who you are. And may that message permeate out of every pore of every person who calls Cedar Creek Church home. Father, lead us over these next 5 weeks to get practical and real about living on mission for your kingdom. It's in your name we pray. Amen.